The number of debt-strapped consumers who are seeking help has jumped by 17% in the second quarter. According to DebtBusters' latest, most recent debt index for quarter two, the combined pressures of increasing interest rates, rising inflation, and a diminished ability to borrow have led to more consumers to seek proactive help, with inquiries about debt counseling having increased by 17% compared to the second quarter of 2021. Benay, the head of DebtBusters, says in comparison to 2016 data, people who applied for debt counseling in quarter two had 34% less purchasing power, higher levels of unsecured debt, and a higher debt service burden.
The stats that we talk about here is our quarterly debt index, where we look at the incoming cohort of consumers who apply for debt counseling. And we essentially compare their debt and income levels to previous years. And as we mentioned on the show before, our business is very cyclical. So it's very important to compare the same quarter to the previous year's same quarters to make sure that we're comparing like to like. Now, the thing is, it's important to see this in the light of consumers who are taking action to improve their finances, who realize that they need help. And it's not in the debt index, but we also ran a separate survey a couple of months ago where we looked at consumers who are not in debt counseling to understand how stressed they are with regards to their financial matters, if they are. And there, one of the significant findings was the fact that when faced with difficult decisions or stressful situations, which debt can become as one, if it's becoming a burden, consumers react one of three ways. The first way, which is probably the most common way, is consumers ignore it. It's known as the flight response. They basically just run away from it. They ignore it. They do nothing from it. The second response is they freeze. They don't know what to do. They know there's an issue, but they actually don't know what avenues are available to them to tackle. And the third way they react is they take action. Now, in this situation, when we're talking about debt counseling, it's important to recognize these consumers have realized that they need to take action, and they've taken the bold and brave step to really work with us, work with their creditors to restructure their debt. And we hope that it also becomes an avenue, something that other consumers who would ordinarily either run away or freeze when faced with difficult debt situation would also consider. So now coming back to your question, how does it look to previous years? Compared to 1 year ago, the debt situation looks actually a little bit better for some income groups, with the exception of the income groups who are earning between 10 and 20,000 Rand. And I think I want to focus on this group because this is the bulk of the South African workforce. This is, many of our first responders. These are our teachers, our nurses, and so on. And what's happening with this group particularly is that this group has been under a lot of strain, even during COVID times. They've had to support a multitude of generations in addition to their normal support, but also had to broaden their support to their friends and family of their generation. At the same time, they are aspirational group. They would most likely have a financed vehicle. So immediately as interest rates go up, they feel it the next day in their next payment. But also they are generally the group that feels the brunt of inflation, very, very quickly. So I think this middle group, this middle income group has really been under a lot of pressure ever since we started tracking this 4 or 5 years ago. And you can really see the strain that this group is facing. For other income groups, the average debt levels are a little bit lower, but compared to a year ago. But for all the income groups, the debt levels are significantly higher than what they were 5, 6 years ago. I think the most significant finding is the fact that the incomes have not changed. So regardless of which income group that you're looking at, again, we compare the income group average income levels to several years ago, and it's exactly the same as it was before in nominal terms. Meaning if someone was earning 10,000 Rand 6 years ago, they're still earning 10,000 Rand. Now, during that period, a lot of things, prices have gone up. In fact, I think pretty much everything's price has gone up. And officially, when you tally up the inflation figures, the compounded effect over the last 6 years is 34%. Meaning, if you are still earning the same as you were before, but things are costing 34% more, one can argue that you're left with, if you want to buy everything that you could buy 6 years ago, then you're going to be left with 34% less money to go around. And what's happening is that the consumers are feeling that. And I mean, it's a really, really desperate situation when it comes to average income levels. And I think that's probably why the consumers feels really constrained or strained.
Let's talk about also the size of the loans that have been given. According to this index, without any income, extra income coming in to supplement their take-home pay, and the ability of many consumers to take on new credit being constrained, there's been a decline in unsecured debt levels. And that does that have to do a lot with interest rates rising, because the average loan size has increased by 28%?
It's important to put it into context. So what's happening is that ever since the beginning of COVID, but even going back a few years before that, the South African workforce, who is the workforce that would borrow money and have good paying jobs, that number at a high level has not been increasing. So the number of employed individuals in the country who would ordinarily look for loans and credit products to, expand what they're doing, be able to buy stuff, finance a car, buy their first house, that number has not been growing. And as a result, since beginning of COVID, actually many more consumers than that have been struggling with, drop in average income levels. So what seems to have happened is that for many consumers that we see at DebtBusters, the number of consumers who would qualify for credit by lenders has actually not changed very much in the last few years. In fact, it's probably gone down. Lenders basically looking at the same pool of consumers that they did a few years ago. And as a result, you can see more repeat lending, but also larger size of loans being given to the same set of individuals. That's essentially what's driving the behavior. Now, in terms of the debt levels, I think we discussed it previously. So the average unsecured debt level is slightly lower than what it was a year ago, but still much higher than what it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. So I think it's important to put this into context. So I think it's a welcome outcome that, compared to 1 year ago, which was arguably probably one of the hardest quarters of 2021, it's good for the consumer, the average debt levels. However, what's not good is even though that's come down, the incomes haven't changed. So as a result, there's still this need for the consumers to borrow to supplement the shortfall that they have for their day-to-day expenses.
On that note, let's take a look at how the JSE performed today.